Good evening and welcome everybody. Thank you for coming. Welcome to the Lake Bluff School District 65 Board of Education Committee, the whole meeting for April 12th, 2016. May we have a roll call, please?
Absolutely. Mark Berry.
Present.
Leanne Charlotte. Present. Julie Gottschall.
Present.
Richard Haig.
Present.
John Rosen.
Present.
Mrs. Ratter.
Present.
Phil Present.
Present.
All right, so we've got a quorum. We can begin. So if everybody please join me and stand and say the Pledge of Allegiance. Pledge of Allegiance.
To the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
Thank you. Now we go to item 3 in our agenda, item 4, which is where we offer the opportunity for public comment. So if anybody would like to address the board, please feel free to do so. Not seeing anybody, we'll move on to item 5, the addition of a discussion item. Every meeting we offer the board the opportunity to raise a topic for a future agenda item or something they think needs to be discussed now. Not hearing anything, we'll move on to discussion items. Item 6, and the first item A is the middle school renovation update and fund balance discussion. Presentation by Dr. Sophie, Mr. Blackmer, and Jay Kahn.
Okay. They're just getting organized. We're all pinch hitting because my administrative assistant doesn't start for a couple weeks yet. So Kevin's taking minutes and we're projecting and we're doing an okay job with that. Tom and Craig are both here for any questions. Tonight though, I really want to talk to you about our renovations and where we are. As the core team, which is our smaller group of administrators, Mark and Leanne, and our steering committees have met. The steering committee is the larger group of teachers, administrators, community members, parents. Over the past year, we've been so very excited about the choices we have made. We have envisioned this beautiful middle school that's complete, one that makes the community proud, and it's done right the first time around. From our perspectives, the board approved an overall project back last summer for a scope of up to $9.2 million. The board also approved an accelerated construction schedule to save at least 2 months of expenses, as well as preserve instructional time for our students. As in the case in most construction projects, we have encountered some challenges and changes in thoughts that have impacted our design. As we have worked through this project, designs have been perfected, finalized bids have gone out, and we've been approving those. So where we started at that up to that 9.2, it feels like we've just been adding to those costs. For instance, the preliminary designs that you reviewed called for the classroom addition to have 4 classrooms. So I'm going way back to last summer. In meeting with the staff and in bringing back to the committees, unanimously we said we cannot bring back our middle school that has less classrooms than before we did the renovation. So our 4 classroom wing went to a 5 classrooms. This change alone cost approximately $600,000. Tonight we're going to take a different approach though as we look at this. We're going to talk to you about the fully envisioned project from the core and the steering committee meetings as to what the project would truly look like if we did take all the incremental costs of the alternates and think about the finalized building and being one that the community is proud of and we feel is done the right way the first time. Both teams really feel like we need to have this finished and completed project. We realize though that this might not be financially feasible, but it is important that you see the big picture and then we can give options as to how to actually peel that back if the board chooses to do so. And we can do less in the next coming months to try to get back to close to where our budgeted figures are. So for just a couple minutes, forget about the budget for a second. If we could have what we really ideally wanted, let's think a little bit about the middle school next fall. First of all, we have our first open house. Now, we all know school's starting late, so it's probably middle of September now. Summer's gone. I'm already sad because it hasn't even started yet. And we're walking in this brand new entrance and we see our beautiful vestibule. In front of us, we see our presentation stairs and our media center. We're in awe, and then we start looking around in the building, and we may have old flooring that doesn't match at all with the new flooring, and it starts feeling a little bit of piecemeal. What kind of impression do we want to have for our parents and community members? This is a building that we want to open up to the community also when they come in and see it. As we walk down the hallways, whether we have the new flooring or not, we see the old beat up doors throughout the building, which really takes away from the big picture, as well as it really doesn't help us at all with all of our safety planning. Last week, Mark, Leanne, and I attended a tri-board meeting, and the village was talking a lot about the Stonebridge development again, as well as other possible housing. And we had commented that if we have this nice new building coupled with our elementary school, we're really attracting new students to our district and to our community. We don't want people to come in and see this beautiful and awesome library and media center and all these other changes. We want them to be wowed by the building and not think of these other items that I just talked about. So tonight we're also going to discuss financing our LBMS renovations. First, we're going to bring you up to speed on exactly how we got where we are with financials. Then Jay's going to talk about specific costs and have a discussion about our fund balance, because this all plays in. And then Nate's going to finish up with what our options are. When that's all done, I'm going to be bringing the question back to you for discussion. So in conclusion, from the very beginning, we have stated that we want the entire building to be touched in one way or another. The core and steering committees have met regularly, and they've envisioned a full, complete building that includes the alternates. As we got further into the project, we knew that we would need to make some decisions on finances by about this point in time. Remember that many of the cost outs were based on plans and designs that weren't completely done or drawn out because we were on that accelerated construction schedule. So we knew that going in. We've talked about the big picture of the project, what the alternates are, for instance, the corridor floors, classroom floors, doors, etc. Jay is now going to talk to you about how we can pay for the big picture if you would like to give us that directive. He will also discuss the ways that we could scale back the cost if that directive is what you want to give us. So if we could flip to the next dollar amount. Okay.
I'll let that settle a little bit, let you react to it.
She turns it over to you, Jay.
Yes, don't throw anything. This is what we think the project, as fully envisioned by the core and steering teams, will cost. To have a finished building where we touch every aspect of the building and and not leave anything unaddressed. Now I'm just going to walk you through how we got to this number. So our original architect estimate was $9.2 million. Craig came in and gave us a range. So based on these drawings, I think it will be 7.4 to 9.2. And as Jean mentioned, that was having a certain square footage of additions in mind. And then in conversations with our teachers and with all the different committees, we really felt like we needed to have the 5 classroom additions, so that the incremental square footage from those classrooms was about $500,000. After these numbers came in, we were trying to get back to the $9.3 million mark. So a lot of the things that we had planned on doing, classroom flooring, things, corridor flooring and doors, we pulled out of the project and basically put below the line as an alternate. So we originally thought, we want to refresh all the classrooms, we want to refresh everything. That kind of got pulled out of the project from the very beginning because we needed more square footage than we thought. That's about $350,000. Next, we went through the village process, which kind of was a long, arduous process. That this was the first time school districts really have done this full process. So it required some additional time and drawings from our architects, and we got considerable feedback. And basically they said, We think you should revisit the front entrance. There was a recommendation for having a skylight to add more light to our building. And then we were very focused on being good neighbors, and due to our history with the chiller, we made every effort to look at our new HVAC in our building and hired extra consultants and designed a system that would be as quiet as possible, but this cost a little bit more money than we had in the original budget.
Jay,
Yes.
is a skylight, or at least one skylight, required now as part of the approval from the village?
It was highly suggested.
All right,
Yeah.
thanks.
And then lastly, we were fast tracking the project by simultaneously designing and bidding and constructing as we went. So there are a lot of finished details that are in these new designs that we really like, that were not captured in the original drawings, such as the tree wall, additional casework and lighting, and things that are really part of the project now, but we're not in the original designs that IHC took their first estimate on. But we don't want to lose sight of the fact that we are saving money by doing this also. So the fast track is not an incremental cost necessarily, but we're saving in general conditions and by not having portables. These additional costs, I'm benchmarking at about $250,000, and that gets us to the 10.5 number.
Jay, what's the square footage of a classroom?
About 1,000 square feet.
That includes the hallway. That would be part of hallway.
So next I'm going to talk about our original budget and look at the budget as we originally envisioned and look at where we stand today. The original project cost we were saying was $9.2 million. The number I just showed you was $10.5 million. We plan to pay for that using a combination of sources. Our budgeted fund balance at the end of this year is $9.76 million. So that, at the beginning of the project, our best guess as to what the fund balance would be at the end of the year was what we budgeted, which was the $9.75 million.
And that's 63% of our.
That's 63% of operating expenditures.
Recall that our fund balance policy is 30 to 50%.
So you're saying that was the original estimate for the end of year fund balance, but that's currently, are we still estimating that number?
No.
That's what I'll
Oh, you're coming up to, okay.
This is the slow reveal.
All right, slow reveal, all right, got it.
Doesn't want to set me off.
So, $9.2 million. When this budget was when the project was approved, we were expecting it to cost 9.2. We were expecting to have 9.8 in the bank. We also were planning to issue 5.375 million of debt service, which would require us to use 3.8 million of that fund balance, leaving us at the end of the year with $5.9 million, or 37.6% of operating expenditures.
So that's the original projection.
That is the original projection for the project that was approved last fall. Now, Susan, to your question, I'm expecting a variance of about $500,000 to budget.
That's the good news.
That's the good news.
Yay.
So,
I was hoping for good news.
if we do not spend it, we would basically at the end of this year, we will at the end of this year, because we're spending bond proceeds, have $10.3 million in fund balance, or 66.7%.
And can you just speak just for a second about how we are $500,000 under budget with respect to expenses?
Sure.
And revenue.
If you recall, this was a very conservative budget. We were unsure of whether or not we were going to get state funding changes this year. They were talking about changing the state funding formula. They were also talking about, in years past we've had proration, so the state would issue or would would set your GSA, general state aid level, and then you'd be getting payments through the year, and then they'd say, oh, we don't have enough money, we're just gonna cut your last 2 payments. So there was always a risk that we wouldn't receive all of the money. So we didn't budget for it. In the budget, I put $0 for general state aid. Turns out, it looks like we're going to get all $185,000 of it. I also was very conservative on our special ed and transportation reimbursements from the state because those monies are also on the chopping block. So we budgeted, I think, to receive only 60% of what it looks like we're going to get. So there's a lot of revenue that's coming in that we did not include in our original budget. And then also we are under our budgeted expenditures in a couple of areas such as special ed where we budgeted conservatively because they're very volatile and didn't want to be at risk of having costs over budget. So this is not necessarily, having these large budget surpluses is not something that is necessarily going to continue, but this was a particularly conservative budget and it looks like we'll have enough left over that I feel very comfortable with the forecast of $500,000 in positive
Maybe I'm
surplus.
getting a step ahead here, but the upcoming year, would you expect or project that we may again see a savings at that level, or?
I think that in this next year, it will be more difficult to have a balanced budget. We will issue a balanced budget, and it will be a conservative budget. So I would expect some small surplus, but I don't envision this magnitude of surpluses in the future. There's also, there's also those same risks in the future. They didn't materialize this year, but there are still several significant risks to funding coming down the pike.
Some would argue that those risks are growing more intense as we move forward. Correct? I mean, that's what I hear.
And we'll talk about that at the very end also.
So with that variance, also our debt service, if you recall when we issued the bonds, the interest rates that we got were below what we anticipated. So we got very good interest rates when we issued the debt. So there was extra proceeds of $291,000. We actually received $5.67 million when we were only anticipating $5.375 million, and that's at the same cost because we were targeting a certain level of payments, and because we had favorable lending environment, we had more in bond proceeds.
And if we didn't have the need to use those, that would fall directly into fund balance at the end of the year.
We would use less fund balance. In addition, we've received several generous donations from the local community. The Kiwanis Club has pledged money towards the front entrance, and the PTO and Alliance are talking about donating money as well towards furniture for the building and other things. So given these additional sources of income, that would say that we would need to use $4.8 million of fund balance if we were going to do if we were going to do the fully envisioned $10.5 million project, which would leave us at the end of the year with almost $5.5 million in fund balance, or 34.6% of operating expenditures.
Jay, I thought PTO was coming up with 200,000.
Much of that is going to the STEM curriculum, which is not part of that $10.5
Oh, not part of
million
that. Okay,
number.
good.
Yeah, they're giving us a very large donation, but it is not necessarily not towards the building, but towards the curriculum.
Okay.
So can you summarize that bottom line again?
So, as originally envisioned in last fall, we were expecting to have $5.9 million of fund balance at the end of the project, or 37.5% of operating expenditures. My most current forecast, based on the best information to date, if we do commit to the full $10.5 million project, we would still have $5.5 million of fund balance remaining, or roughly almost 35% of operating expenditures.
So it really only moves the fund balance needle 3 points.
Well, from the fall, but from the beginning of the project, it moves it from 63, right?
Well, we knew we were gonna spend down fund balances. Anyways, 4.7, here's the number. We had planned to spend fund balance even with the $9.2 million project. It's just, we're talking about an additional $468,000 of fund balance that is unplanned for, which affects our fund balance by about 3 points. Still above our minimum.
So net here is that we're going to use an incremental $500,000 out of our fund balance.
And this is only if we choose to do it this way.
I understand.
They're going to present to us options where we can scale back. So this is how it's possible if we choose that.
Yeah, I mean, the debt service would have gone into fund balance anyway. The operating savings would have gone to fund balance. So net is the $500,000 that we're utilizing. That's really the core of the question. The presentation is $500,000 out of fund balance that we'll be using incremental.
What happens?
I'm sorry?
What other?
What's left of that?
We are almost through the bidding process. How much do we have left, Tom?
Microphone.
Oh, microphone.
I do want to point out that although we've been over budget on our bids by $250,000, there was contingency built into the numbers that you've seen of the same magnitude that's been pulled out. So
So that's why that 250 doesn't show up there anywhere, right?
Right.
It was in the 9.2.
it was in the 9.2 beginning.
Okay.
So we've talked a lot about bidding, I think because we've been hopeful that we would have really low bids and that would help us to spend more on the project when we would kind of save. We wouldn't have to use it and it would, be a positive. It would save us, we'd be able to add more to the project. And it turns out that we are having to use it, but that's why it was there in the first place, and that's the process. That's what IHC does, is they know that they're not going to be right with their number and it's going to be plus or minus a certain percentage, and so we build that in advance, and we've used that. But I'll let Todd.
We have 4 more trade packages to bid out, which is approximately $650,000 worth of work.
So everything else has been bid.
Everything else has been bid.
But in the past, we've been off roughly, what, 10%?
Well, it's varied from trade package.
I know.
The first trade package, I think, might have been off 15, 20%.
So what's the downside on the remaining amount, would you say, in your best professional experience?
I would say you could have 10%.
So $60,000 incremental, so we could be talking about 520 instead of 460 here. I just want to get an idea what the...
Right. But again, there's also contingency in this budget. In this number, we still have $250,000 of contingency, and there are also
We're also looking at some value engineering ideas, between White and ourselves, and looking to offset even these numbers here. So.
Yeah, the one thing I want to avoid is having to come back in another month and say, oh, it's not 10.5 now, guys, it's 10.7 or 10.6. I want to make sure that the 10.5 is like the most conservative out there number we've got. If it's less than that, I'll pat you on the back and we'll be happy with that, but I don't want to go.
Yeah, again, it's always a guess.
Right.
Out here, we had bids just last week. One trade package, the high bid we had 3 bids. The high bid was $500,000. The low bid was $335,000. I think to say 10% is a
Reasonable.
Reasonable.
So the 250 we've been over so far, was built into the 9.2 as contingency. Is that the total contingency? Have we now used up all contingency, or we have another 250?
There's 250 left.
Okay.
Yeah, we started with 500,000.
Okay.
Yeah.
So the 10.5 assumes that we spend that contingency
Yes,
too.
it does.
Okay.
Yes.
So if that
Which-
last trade package comes in, worst case 10% over, we're okay because it's in there,
Correct.
right?
So in theory, we could say yes to this and
Come in a little high.
end up, in theory, we could come to the end of it then and not have used contingency if those packages come in where we expected and, okay. And we're
Is
better
this-
off than we thought.
Yeah, and does this get us the plant we ultimately want in its entirety? I mean,
That was going to be my question: is which features are you throwing into this plan, and which ones have you still left out? That's it. All right. Okay. Cool. All right.
We have another question for Jay. I think we might.
That shows the fund balance for next year. What about in years after that, where it's projected to keep going down? Yeah. I mean, I guess I answered the question myself. You're nodding an affirmation.
That is the fund
yeah.
balance for next year.
Right.
So that's going to be the discussion at the end of this is 35% of operating expenditures enough to have in your fund balance at the end of next year to protect against the known and the unknown costs that we'll have in the future.
Well, the last time, not too long ago, you showed us fund balance projections going beyond the end of this project, and
Right.
and it was using the original estimate of 37%, and it tailed off after several years.
yeah.
And so it's going to, unless we change that, do something to change it, perhaps speed up that tail at the end.
Yeah.
Well, it'll move it down.
Yeah.
So it'll be the same shape, but it'll be a little bit lower.
Okay.
But I think one of the reasons that there was a push, at least on my part, to maintain a higher fund balance was because I knew we had big expenses coming down the pike to take care of the middle school. So I don't know if that makes us feel a little better about it not being 50-60% down closer to 35 or.
I thought we wanted to make sure not to go below 25. I thought was our bottom, but.
So why don't we let Nate go through the options, because we felt it was our responsibility to present to the board not only the way, how could we possibly fund the whole thing, but if we thought it was our responsibility to scale back, and here's how we could do that.
So, as we've already discussed, the 10.5 is the fully envisioned project. And just for a quick recap, that's everything we've talked about so far. That includes floors, that's corridor floors, classroom flooring, also the doors and hardware on all of the existing classrooms. Those were things that at one point in time appeared as an alternate bid, then back into the full project. So that's the whole everything. I don't know if there's specific questions about what this includes. I'm happy to answer those, and if I can't, I know Craig can.
It really is the entire project minus what we have discussed with you about the fields. The fields would not be
That's what
done.
we have to think of.
But
It's not
the shed, Steve's shed, and everything, the
District
skylight
office.
and everything else we've talked about, the only other thing that it does not include, which we removed early on, is a movable wall in the basement
No, it's actually,
in one of the classrooms. Because we did that way back when we added the classroom addition, we were starting to look at ways we could kind of scale down. So it's really everything minus the fields, minus the movable wall.
And it includes moving the administrative offices over, correct?
It
Yes.
includes moving the district office over, yes.
Yes. Okay. So as a second option, this would be to take out those things that I mentioned. That would be the doors and the hardware, flooring, both in the corridors and in the classrooms. So that's a savings of roughly $350,000 if we choose not to do those items. It's option number 2. We're going to take a look at the third that has the same alternate options being removed as option number 2 did, with a savings of $350,000. And then this is where you would look at either delaying or discontinuing the idea of moving the district office into the middle school. One of the issues with that is that it wasn't bid in such a way that that we'd be that wasn't an anticipated possibility when the bidding went out.
So it wasn't bid as an alternate.
Right, it was not bid as an alternate. The construction of the district office space on the lower level was part of the bid process. It's important to keep in mind that there is a lease in place through July 31st of 2017, so it's not as though the district office would be without a place, without a home. But there is, of course, a cost to that and an ongoing cost of renting space in the current office complex. The other point to keep in mind is that we wouldn't necessarily recapture the full savings simply because you've got some work to do regardless as you rough out the space on the lower level, and it was again part of the bid package.
That work is required by code, you have to sprinkle, still have to sprinkle.
Well, and if we put it off, my understanding is it would probably cost more than the $500,000 we save now because right now it's part of the bigger picture, the way it was bid.
Admittedly, there's always construction inflation that happens. But the work that we have to do still is demolition and as well as sprinkling the building, and that's a code requirement. So.
Any questions about these three options that we've just presented?
I do want to add, and Jay's going to finish up with me. All of these do not include the classroom furniture. So the furniture that you had seen, for instance, the furniture in the hallway for that one classroom wing that we said furniture was not included. After we actually went, and Jay has been working on furniture purchases, we were able to buy furniture and desks and chairs for that hallway to make it look all together. We've been able to outfit the whole library media center, the lunchroom. What it does not include is classroom furniture, desks and chairs, and I'm going to have Jay talk about that for just a second.
So we got the proposal back for the furniture, which you'll be seeing probably at the next board meeting or at the first board meeting in May. We were able to furnish the entire library media center, the STEM lab, the science labs, the cafeteria, and the classroom that's downstairs that's part of the cafeteria, as well as the hallways. And then we got teacher furniture for the new classrooms. The only thing we did not get was the student furniture for the new classrooms. And we would just continue to use our existing furniture from our current classrooms. And then we would replace the furniture on a schedule over the next several years. So when you walk into the building, all the common areas will be furnished with brand new furniture and conference rooms as well.
And that's included in any of these scenarios? Okay.
And I almost hate to ask it, but none of the scenarios include cabinetry, right? Then
Cabinetry, yes, we have casework. Casework is included.
casework is included.
Yes, it is.
In the spaces that we're touching, renovating or
Not the old spaces.
Oh, yeah, that's what I was
Not
thinking
the old
of.
spaces.
So, okay.
Thank you, Nate. I do want to make a comment while Nate is going back to his chair that you may want to wish our senior administrator a happy 40th. His birthday is this Friday. We will all be celebrating with him this year. Sorry, Nate. Sorry, Nate.
I didn't see that in rehearsal.
He added it, you just didn't know. Now we get to the tough part. As I shared with our core team, and I will share with all of you, I know as a board you look to me and to our team for a recommendation, and I'm going to tell you I'm having a hard time with that. And the reason for that is, on the one hand, I really feel strongly that we need to get this project done the right way and be done with it. I don't want to hear, well, we should have done the floors, and we should have done this, we should have done that. And when I looked at the bottom line for the fund balance, I'm thinking it's within our range, it's going to be okay. On the other hand, as I shared with all of you from meeting with legislators many times the past month, even though the state, we've been talking about that rainy day forever and ever and ever, well, it's starting to sprinkle. The rain is coming. So, and I have a hard time figuring out, even if we had a fund balance of 75%, I don't even know if that would cover it. The state doesn't even know what they're going to do for all of our school districts.
Can you tick off for us on the camera the things that make up the storm?
Yes, but I'm going to give the microphone to Jay to jump in with me. I'll start, Jay. So we have the pension shift. We talked about that. We have the school funding formula. We have, what else?
Property tax freeze,
Property tax freeze, which they're talking anywhere from 1 to 5 years or permanently.
our neighbor to the north.
Our neighbor to the north, and what will happen with that, with their charter school. That's 4 things. I think that's it, right?
I think there was one other state proposal for cutting special ed extraordinary funding.
And there was another proposal to cut special ed, which in turn pulls from our budget. So now, if you're like me, and I have conversations with this often with my executive director of my organization, he constantly tells me, Gene, this has been going on since 2008. And I realized that, and every year I kind of thought to myself, well, it'll happen next year. Well, it'll happen next year. I have never ever seen a state that is in such a poor condition as we're in now. So something will happen. I can't tell you what's going to happen. I don't think anybody can tell you what's going to happen. I can tell you something will happen. I can't tell you any amount of money that would be associated with that. So philosophically, you as our elected officials really need to have that discussion, and we need to be provided the directive on what to do with it, because all of our names are going to be on this project. And a lot of children and community members are going to be touched by this building. So we need to really determine, are we going to do this project as it's fully envisioned, or are we going to cut back and try to budget things in, knowing that we don't know if we're going to be able to do that with state funding? Or are we going to take a conservative approach and try to peel back some of these things to make sure we have money for a rainy day? And if we do, you saw the difference in fund balance. Is that really going to make as big a difference as you'd like it to be? So that's where, now the next slide says board discussion. Oh, I have to bring it up? I don't know how that works. There was a board discussion. So now we're going to have a board discussion. I'm going to go back and take my seat. Jay and Nate, I think you guys should probably come up to the mic if you have questions. Tom and Craig, you may be calling. So.
Can you actually go back so we have some numbers up there to look at? Thanks. Yeah. Go to the cutting
That one?
That's a good one, but actually, can you go forward to the alternatives that you the last screen? Okay.
While she's thinking about that, you want to think a little more?
No, go ahead. I just wanted.
As it presently stands, of course, by using fund balance, we're not explicitly affecting tax rates. So residents aren't affected by that. But let's say in the future, let's say we go ahead with this and approve moving forward with doing a complete job, and the rain starts to fall harder. To raise another, and let's say our problem in the future is $500,000, and we're underfunded by $500,000. How does that affect taxpayers if we have to increase the levy to generate another $500,000 in taxes?
If it came to that point where we needed incremental money that we could not levy under the current property tax limitation law, we would need to go to referendum and ask the taxpayers to provide that.
Even if we're forced into these requirements by state obligations, the state dictates to us that we're going to freeze property taxes, for example, so even in that case, there's no flexibility there except to go to referendum.
And you have to remember, most districts across the state are going to be
Right, I understand
worse
that.
than we are.
Right.
Presumably, the state would phase in any changes so that it would have a dramatic impact on districts,
Right.
or would give some alternatives, so allow you to reduce costs by removing mandates or other costs that you have, or if they're going to change the funding formula, allow you to raise money in some other way. But in terms of taxpayers, we are, the only way we can get additional revenue from our taxpayers is through operating taxes or debt service.
Because, when I joined the board, one of our big items was the fund balance. It was fairly substantial. So I went back and did a little study and gathered some information, and the fact is that the district has never had to use its fund balance. And in fact, the fund balance before like 1997 was $1 million or $2 million. It was very, very, very low, and then events occurred, and they decided to increase the fund balance, and they never stopped increasing it. So on an ongoing operating basis, and when we originally looked at the fund balance policy, we assumed we probably never really need the fund balance, we just have it as a safety net. But these new requirements are so unknown, so uncertain, there's no way to be definitive about what's going to be needed or required.
In all
For any
likelihood,
Or when?
if it got to that point, we would need to resort to short-term borrowing, and we would issue warrants or revolving loans, and we would be borrowing money to meet our obligations and paying them off over time.
Any other questions, concerns, comments? Because we are going to need directive at this point.
So the 350 that's up there, somewhere along the line I jotted a note that also included skylight. Is that right or no?
We put the skylight in because of the fact that when you have the two classrooms where the skylight's going between, it's blocked out windows,
Yeah.
and that we needed the light in
So
there.
so the skylight's
Skylight's in there already.
It's not in the 350 or the 500 though.
No.
It's elsewhere.
I mean, as we look to taking things off the table, it seems to me we ought to think about what the cost is of doing them later. If there's a cost savings to just doing it now, let's just do it now. But if it's the same price to do it later, maybe we do defer some things. So I heard pretty definitively that not building out the district office likely is not a savings.
Which one of you would like to step up to the mic to handle that?
Definitely doing now saves you money.
Right.
Anything you put off 1 year, labor unions have a yearly increase in their salary. And, construction is just a volatile industry, so
Right.
anything you put off now, you can just figure it's going to cost you more in the future.
Plus, we save $60,000 in rent once the lease is up. So the payback is what, 8 years? 8 times 60 is 480, $500,000. So it pays itself off in 8 years. So it makes no
Not
sense.
Year one, so
Not in year one,
That
but
doesn't
this
sound like an
building's
option,
right.
So we just
We
No,
can
I-
also sublet. We're looking to see if we can find a renter.
Good. Now, something like the existing classroom flooring, I don't know how much of a cost savings that represents, but that strikes me as something that maybe can be deferred without a big administrative hassle and an increased cost of doing that later on. And these are classrooms where we've got the old cabinetry and the old furniture and everything anyway, so does that really make an impactful difference to change the floor right now? So maybe that's something we can talk about.
Again, that would cost more money later.
Well, because inflation,
Yeah, just-
wages go up,
just
but
cost.
other than that, it's a pretty discrete job.
And what's the total cost savings on that, Tom? If we weren't to do the existing classroom flooring?
We had, I think it was 155,000 in the doors and hardware, in the classroom flooring. That budget actually came in 40 grand under, so I think that is somewhere in the neighborhood of 150,000.
Isn't it all?
The flooring, somewhere in there.
Tom, somewhere in the earlier discussion, I heard you say something about, I don't know, something engineering.
Value
Value engineering.
Value engineering,
So is that something that's represented here, or is
no,
that something else
that is
altogether?
not, and there's things that Craig and I have discussed in terms of, there's a couple of mechanical things that we can change that's gonna save $9,500. We're looking at some electrical things that looks like we may have a, $20,000 savings. So there's things like that we're coming up with that it is not accounted for in the 10.5. So that $30,000 comes right off that 10.5. But I mean, we may find $50,000.
Yeah.
It's $50,000.
And that 250 left on the contingency is also not yet
Potential.
used. It's
Not
potential.
yet used, correct.
I try not to even think about it.
I know. I'm just.
I feel better not thinking
They
about
haven't
that.
done any demolition, so we don't know what's behind the walls and the mystery walls and what kind of things they could find.
If we still have it, it's a gift at the end.
Here's my 2 cents from my perspective. You know, we're going to spend $9.2 million to build a building that's hopefully going to last us another 30 or 40 years. We don't want to build half a building or make it look like you walk in and it's great over here and it's lousy over here. You know, my theory in life has always been if I'm going to buy a coat that's going to last me 20 years, I really don't care what I spend on it this year because I'm going to wear it for 20 years. I think in this case, we're not affecting taxpayers. We're using fund balance that we may require in the future, but we don't know for certain whether we're going to require that or not. So I think it would be painful to do 80% of this job and not complete it by avoiding spending another $500,000 in fund balance. That's my opinion.
I mostly agree with what you just said. I'm feeling a little fuzzy though tonight, from the standpoint of you're asking us to give us direction, and we've got a PowerPoint here.
And we'll do a vote next week.
I get that, but you know, I think we need to be a little. I'm not getting the level of specificity that we've had in previous documents.
I agree.
So if we're going to take a vote on this next time,
We'll get you all.
I want to know what all we're putting in, as we've had those documents before, and what all we're basing that off of. Because if you come back, which God, I hope you don't come back and say, you know, hey, we're over. Like, we need to know what's going on in terms of what all the alternates are that are going in. So. Anyway, when we come back next time, can we get the spreadsheet back again with all the stuff in?
I don't think the spreadsheet. Everything that's in the alternates, everything's in here. I think you need to have this because that will detail everything.
I know what you're talking about. I kept expecting it to appear. We had alternate A, B, C,
Right.
D, E, and
We could have that and then just put off to the side what we've done. With
because
those.
lumping it
Right.
all together as 350 doesn't help me a whole lot.
Yeah.
You know, where's the skylight? It's already in there. Doesn't help me a whole lot. But I do think that level of specificity is required for a 1.3 million ask. So
Are you?
I'm generally where John is.
Exactly. I mean, if
I'm not sure I understand. You mean the incremental alternatives that were at the bottom of that list? Oh, okay.
well,
Right, and then
when,
what
when,
each
when we
package
say
was-
that, what all, I want to know. At the end of the day, we got to explain this to our friends and neighbors, right?
Mhm.
And if we end up pulling additional money out of fund balance to do it, I want to know when I make that decision or make that vote, what it was that we decided to put in at that moment in time, and you know, if we go beyond that, I kind of want to know what I said yes to at that price point at that point in time. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Sure.
It does.
Tom, I'm going to need you and Jay to work on that tomorrow because we've got to get the board packet posted Thursday. So
That's it. You know, I think I'm in total agreement with what you said, and you know, I think you know, at the end of the day, you know, you don't buy a Mercedes and you know not have like leather interior and you know those types of things, or don't put or you know you don't put hubcaps on the thing. You know, how's that? But
Okay.
no, I mean, you know, at this point, the price point's pretty, you know, nominal.
I think the other thing I just want to add to the discussion, over the last 2 years, or since we've been on the board, like 3 years, we've saved roughly $3.5 million over a 20-year period in bond refinancing. So if you add that up, I think, and I know that's not it's part of the $500,000. Part of the $500,000 savings comes from some of the small amount of savings that we incurred this year. So, you know, it makes me feel a little better about having to dig into that fund balance, because the fund balance wouldn't be as big as it's going to be if we hadn't done that in the first place. So,
I wouldn't mind hearing from other members of the board who haven't said anything.
I generally agree with the sentiment that's been expressed. I do. I don't think you screw. That's hence my question about, are there certain things, if the classrooms look pretty raggedy anyway. Maybe there's an opportunity to save a little bit by not putting in new floors, which is only going to underscore the raggediness of some of the other things. That being said, that's $150,000 maybe in the scope of this project. You're already having the floor guys come in to do the corridors to just get it done. In terms of the rainy day and what's going to happen, I think there's an argument to be made that perhaps if the rainy day is coming, you're better off not sitting on a pile of cash and having spent that money on your district.
I've heard that before.
So, I think we have this opportunity, we have the money. I'm inclined to say let's just move forward with all of it.
I'm going to retract my Mercedes comment, but
If you thought about it.
I'm going to retract it, but I'm still going to keep on cars. Okay, so and I only bring this up just for perspective. I mean, when this whole thing started, when I first came on the board about a year ago, there were some people that thought it would be ludicrous if we didn't tear the thing down and spend $30 million on a brand new building, and we didn't do that. And there's some people too that didn't think we should put a penny into it, and so we initiated this in a very pragmatic way. And I think that I want to bring that up and remind people of that. And we're still, I think within that scope of pragmatism. Even if we incrementally go up to what you're now asking for with 10, where we're at 10.5. And I think it's important for the public to know that and be reminded of it.
What do you guys think, Rich? Yeah.
Well, I always question, is this going to improve the education? Well, probably not. However, this community always wants to have something that looks nice and is representative of the community we live in. So I kind of put that argument in my mind aside, because probably everybody isn't thinking the way I would on that. So, and I'm okay with it. So, although I think Phil's comment about the Mercedes, you're really just trying to get a car to get you from A to B.
He meant Ford
But
Focus.
most of the people around here.
So that's going to be played over and over by some
Going
political
for
action
it.
committee in the next school board election, I'm sure.
I'm sure the Lake Forest leader will include the retraction.
The
in
patches.
Do you have anything to say to that?
I think we've done a good job of soliciting input from experts and from people from all different parts of the community to get to the plan that we have. I'd like to see it completed for a couple reasons. One, I think we'll get a cohesive look where the whole school will be, the flooring will be the same. We won't be ordering flooring in a year and a half and it's a different color and the tiles are a different size or whatever. So I like that, and I also like that we just get done with this, because we've been talking about redoing the middle school since before you got here.
That's true.
I think it's time to just accomplish it and get done.
I would tend to agree with most of what I've heard. I fall on the data that I thought was most convincing to me was the net impact on fund balance by financing by funding the whole thing. We're moving our fund balance from roughly 37% of operating costs down to 35. Correct, Jay? Isn't that roughly, or 34? 34. 3 points, not quite $500,000 of touching fund balance. It doesn't touch taxpayers. I think we're 85-95% of the way to making this project as good as we can. I think we should bring the whole thing home, my opinion.
So what we will do is get some more specific data. I've got to figure out what kind of vote to put in, so I'm going to have to work with James Levy on that. And we will bring this back to you next week so we can move forward.
What kind of what to put?
Vote. Because I'm not sure what that looks like, since I've never done that before.
How to word it and stuff.
Right. How to word the motion.
Because technically, is a vote needed for this?
I don't know. That's why I may have to write a memo and just say everyone's got to come to consensus, or I'm really going to find that out.
I guess what would help me on the specifics is, as planned, we thought this bid package, we budgeted this bid package at 1.2 and it came in at 1.3. And this one we budgeted, I think we had that on some,
The last time I was here, I
Yeah.
had that spreadsheet.
and then the puts and takes, because some of it came in under. And I just like to see as planned versus where we are.
I think
To explain the difference.
we didn't put that in because ultimately we had allowances and contingency.
Yeah,
The big impacts were the classroom addition.
yeah, I
the
understand.
skylight.
I understand
So-
that. Well, you could even at the 9.2, you could add that into as planned. I just like to know, like that also seems like, okay, we knew what we were getting ourselves into, but where's the overruns? Where's the delta here that accounts for some of this? And some the trade packages came in higher, and I'd like to be able to explain that. How much of this is just is the plans have changed, and how much of it is trade packages came in higher. I'd like to be able to explain that.
It would be, maybe there's a way to get everybody your presentation, because I think
Yeah, we're gonna get that.
Jay's does a lot of that.
And to be honest, we had a lot of that in here and pulled it out because we wanted to keep it simple and not have people looking at all the details. And we didn't want to make it too complicated because it really, one, it's difficult to do because trade packages are bid as steel and
Yeah.
concrete, not front entrance.
Right, I understand.
So to break things out is not always as straightforward. And then also, I think we've talked a lot about bidding variances, and I didn't want to include it because I don't think that's really the point. Like, that's not why we're over budget. It's really scope. We had contingency in the number to cover the bidding variances.
And allowances.
And allowances, so that's all kind of in a wash. That hasn't increased the project at all. We didn't benefit from bids coming in low, but we didn't, we're not, the project is not over budget because the bids came in high because we had contingency that has been taken
If you
out.
go back to your initial slide, almost $1 million came from the expansion of the classroom and the requirements of the village.
Yeah.
Yep, right there.
Jay, what I would like you to do is, and I don't know how you do that with the slow reveal,
250.
but if you could get me your presentation, and we'll get you the information that you need. We'll get that for you.
I mean, I sort of walked from 9.2 to 10.5 in big, small steps, saying this costs this, this costs this, this costs this, and it just, I certainly can share that. We
If you
felt
could
that
get that
to keep it
presentation,
simple in as a discussion.
they need to see the slow reveal one too. So.
I do want to make a comment though about the level of detail. I'm concerned about the level of detail requested, and the reason is I'm worried about what we do with that as a board when we get into the minutia. When Jay showed, when we see lighting and casework and the initial estimate and the core team and what's the other name?
Steering.
And the steering committee both worked very hard to make some of these decisions as to what goes in, what goes out, and what the completed vision should be. And I'm worried by including that level of detail, we're opening up the board to be deciding on casework and lighting.
No.
And
level
I don't see it that way at all. I mean,
because that's what I was hearing.
I-
I'm hoping to hear
No.
something.
no, well, I'll tell you what I do want. I want that before we vote, if we have to vote, because if you come back again in another 5 weeks or whatnot, like, sorry, we're over again. I need some. I don't think it's too much to ask to say what did I vote on 4 weeks ago? What were you basing this off of? And now what happened off of what I voted on before? I don't think that's too much to ask.
Yeah, I don't either. And I fundamentally feel like I need to be able to explain the difference between 9.2 and 10.5. And I see that here, but I think there are still moving parts here. And I feel like I need to understand them better. I guess to some extent I'm wondering about, are we at a point where we get a revised budget? Like, you have to build in $500,000 in contingencies on the front end, but as you get closer, as the project proceeds, you have less of a need for contingency, right? As don't you? Because you know you then have some of the unknowns are now known, right?
Oh, absolutely.
And so it seems to me that there's other moving parts here that, and
It
this
becomes
simplifies
fluid.
it too much for me anyway.
It becomes fluid throughout the project as allowances and or contingency used or don't get used up will determine what's left of that contingency.
Anyway.
So we will get that information.
So we have that
We'll
we can
regroup.
provide it, and
Yeah.
I don't think it's unreasonable at all.
I don't think
But we need to be, I just want to clarify, we need to be ready to
give directive,
give direction.
whether it's by
next-
a vote or next
uh,
Tuesday.
Next Tuesday. Excuse me, because we're at the point now that if we don't, we're
The project
interfering
stops.
with the project schedule and kids can't come back to school that day in September. Okay.
I can't imagine that we wouldn't have a vote. I mean, we're
Oh, and I'm guessing that we will. I just don't know. 'cause
I just want to make that explicit so if people think there's anything else they need, that we get it now.
We're really voting to take additional money out of fund balance
Right.
to complete the
Right.
project.
Yeah.
Right.
Seems like a vote.
It seems to me like a vote, but I'm going to make sure.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And you know, I think Mark, just to go back and you know, this request doesn't take anything away from the work that core team has been doing. I mean, I think you know, I think when we initiated this project, I remember making the comment, these types of decisions and focus and scope and stuff and what's important and not important should lie in the hands of the core team. I mean, we shouldn't be, as a school board, value engineering this project. That's not our role. But I do think when we vote to go into fund balance even further on this, we should know what it is that we're buying with that.
Very fair. We thank you for listening, and we will get that information for you.
Everybody said what they need to say? All right, we're going to move on to item 6B, policy 7.5, school admissions and student transfers to and from non-district schools.
This was added to the agenda as an added agenda item by Susan, so I'll let her take over on that one.
Yeah, and included in our board packets was a copy of the policy, which I went back and looked at, and think that I understand further what it is that we already have on the books. Thanks. So perhaps I've answered my own question simply by reading the policy, but in the policy it references procedures and. Regarding people who transfer in or kids who transfer out. Yeah.
And we have all those procedures.
And those procedures, and I guess that was a follow-up question. Do we have those procedures written? I know that we've been going back to the policies over and over again, but the procedures are in various states as far as I can understand. But we do have that.
Yes.
Okay. So I don't think I have any additional questions about it. I think the review of the policy makes it pretty clear, and my understanding of it, that the procedures are in place makes sense.
Thank you.
Anybody else? All right, so then we're going to move on to item 6C, the District 187 support letter. You guys have had a chance to review a draft that was put together for many of the surrounding districts around District 187, as well as a revised letter that Board Member Gotchel helped to draft along with
It's all good. No, it's all
just to give some background here, we're talking about North Chicago's public schools. District 187 has recently received an application from Learn Charter to open a second 500 student, please correct me if I'm
You're
wrong,
doing okay.
a second 500 student charter school in North Chicago. And the process is that charter school applies first to the local Board of Education, so the District 187 Board of Education, for approval. And the state, the two boards that District 187 operates under both rejected the Learn Charter application. Learn Charter then had a definitive window to appeal that decision to the State Charter Commission. And now the District 187 administration is going to make its case to defend their vote to reject that application to the State Charter Commission. And as part of that, they have requested letters of support from surrounding districts, Lake Bluff being one of them, to the State Charter Commission in support of the District 187 Board's opinion. Did I do that right? That's
You
not
did,
about right?
and then what I had put in the board packet before is the letter that all the other districts are sending. Julie and Susan were gracious enough to say they would draft another one. I like the other one much, much, much better. So I guess we're bringing this back for your feedback. This is something Ben needs right away, so if all of you are in consensus, this is not a vote, I would put this on the district letterhead, sign my name and all of your names tomorrow and get it off to him.
Yeah, the second letter's much better.
It is. Thank you.
It takes up less paper too.
Yeah.
I like
It
that.
gets.
More focused.
It is far more focused to the point.
I like the second letter better, but I don't get the my name is Dr. Jean Sophie line. I feel like that should we just take out and
I'd be happy to take that out.
Yeah.
start with the, because they're going to see that that's who you are when you sign it, right?
I'm good with that.
Well, that's the first letter. The second.
Yeah,
The
this
second
one
letter
says I
doesn't
write
say
to you as my capacity.
Oh, you
Yeah, I
did?
didn't think
Oh, I'm
of that.
sorry.
No, it's not in the second letter.
The one change I would make is that phrase, we'll put district in the second paragraph, District 187 in a precarious and potentially fatal financial position. That was language from the first letter. I don't particularly like that language upon rereading.
What if we just say in a precarious
Financial
financial
position.
position?
Mhm.
Yes.
That's okay. All right, if everybody agrees.
I had a couple very brief thoughts. I don't know if anybody agrees or not, but again, in that second paragraph, this would be the fourth sentence that starts, we believe that permitting a second charter school. I was wondering because I remember Julie had made the point, and I agreed with it, that we haven't seen this data that was being presented, referred to consistently in that last letter. But what if we said something like, we support Dr. Martindale's position that permitting a second charter school would put District 187 in precarious. And then we can put up another sentence that says something like, please refer to the financial projections provided by Dr. Martindale for complete details. Because they've seen all that.
Mm-hmm.
We didn't create those projections.
Yeah.
Can't verify them, but they seem valid.
Right. Right.
Make sense?
Yes. Can you just say, I'll look at it. Like, can we do that? Look at
We can
it
do-
and
yeah.
wordsmith a little bit more?
Yeah. I mean,
Yeah.
that was just
Yes,
it
it's
was
fine.
not-
So how are you guys going
I'm
to do it?
fine.
Because I need
Well,
to get it
I'm
out
fine
tomorrow.
with you guys. Yeah, okay.
You guys can
I'm
find
fine
us.
with it as it is, or I'm fine if you wordsmith it
I
tonight.
need to get it out tomorrow. If someone wants to work on it and get it to me tomorrow morning, that would be great.
I see your point. I like your point. There was one word or phrase I changed, but we'll do that
Yeah.
later.
We
As
can
long as
just do it tonight if you want.
So if
Yeah.
somebody could get,
It's almost there. I think it's 2 minutes. Take what I need and tweak it.
if you could tweak that, Julie, and give it to me, then I'll be ready to use it. Okay.
Anybody else have any comments on that letter? Do we as a board or an
You don't
administration?
No.
No voting, just if there's anything we need to clarify.
Nope.
Okay, so we're going to move on to item 6D, Olson Transportation Contract Extension. And
As you might remember, Jay actually brought this to you and talked to you about it a month and a half ago. And he was waiting for Hodges to come back with their review of the contract extension. And they have reviewed the contract extension and now we have to vote on it. So he's detailed everything in the memo. We'll be voting on it next week, but I wanted to see if there were any questions because you have seen this before.
no questions. Still looks good.
Next.
anybody?
That's it.
Okay. That was easy. Item 7, public comment. Anybody who needs to address the board, please do so now. Otherwise, at 8:11, I'll ask for a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
All in favor?
Aye.
So we are adjourned. Thank you for attending.
Phil, you want to accompany me over to Mercedes lot?